poor girl helped an old black man cross the street, unaware he was the town's richest farmer. The rain fell in a cold, relentless sheet, plastering Alara's thin cardigan to her skin and turning the city's indifferent concrete into a slick, gray mirror. Beside her, a small hand, chilled to the bone, squeezed her fingers. "Mommy, I'm so cold." The voice was a tiny whisper against the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, but it was a thunderclap in Alara's heart. How could she know that this simple, desperate moment of a mother's love was about to change the entire course of her life? Alara knelt, her worn jeans soaking up the puddle beneath her. She looked into her daughter Lily's face, a perfect miniature of her own, now pale and shivering, her lips tinged with blue. They had been turned away from the last shelter. Full, they'd said, with a finality that felt like a slammed door on the world itself. Hope was a flickering candle in a hurricane. Without a word, Alara stripped off her own jacket, a flimsy denim thing that offered more psychological comfort than actual warmth, and wrapped it around Lily's small, trembling shoulders. The immediate shock of the icy rain on her own arms was nothing compared to the warmth that bloomed in her chest at Lily's sigh of relief. "Better, sweet pea?" Lily nodded, burying her face in the jacket that smelled of her mother. "Better." They huddled together under the meager protection of a bus stop awning, their single, battered suitcase serving as a makeshift bench. The world rushed past them, a blur of headlights, hurried umbrellas, and faces that refused to see. Alara's stomach was a tight, aching knot of hunger and fear. She had $2.17 in her pocket, a 5-year-old daughter to protect, and a future as bleak and vast as the storm-darkened sky. It was in this moment of profound despair, as she watched the traffic light across the street cycle from green to red, that she saw him. He was an old man, standing uncertainly at the curb. His movements were slow, hesitant, and the cane in his hand seemed more a burden than a support. He was black, with a crown of snow-white hair that the rain was plastering to his head, and he wore a heavy, old-fashioned wool coat that looked like it had seen a lifetime of winters. As the walk sign flashed, he took a tentative step into the crosswalk, just as a city bus rumbled past, sending a tidal wave of filthy street water splashing over him. The force of it made him stagger, his cane slipping on the painted lines. Cars, impatient and loud, began to honk, their drivers cocooned in warmth and annoyance. Something inside Alara, a core of compassion that poverty had not yet managed to erode, snapped into focus. She saw not just an old man, but a reflection of her own vulnerability, someone alone and struggling against a world that was too fast and too unforgiving. "Stay right here, Lilybug. Don't move an inch," she commanded softly. Leaving their suitcase, their only worldly possession, unguarded on the pavement, Alara took Lily's hand and strode purposefully into the street. She didn't shout or wave her arms. She simply became a shield. Planting herself between the old man and the oncoming traffic, she held up a hand, her expression one of quiet, unshakable resolve. The nearest car, a sleek black sedan, screeched to a halt inches from her. The driver laid on his horn, his face a mask of fury. Alara didn't flinch. She reached the old man's side. "Sir, can I help you?" He looked at her, his dark eyes clouded with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. He was trembling, whether from cold or shock, she couldn't tell. I seem to have lost my nerve." His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "It's all right," Alara said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's go together. Take my arm." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then his gnarled hand closed around her forearm. Lily, clutching Alara's other hand, looked up at the man with wide, curious eyes. Together, the unlikely trio moved across the street, a small island of deliberate calm in a sea of urban chaos. Alara timed their steps to his, her body instinctively shielding him from the spray and the wind. When they reached the opposite curb, safely on the sidewalk, she gently released his arm. "There you are, safe and sound." The old man took a deep, shuddering breath, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked from Alara's drenched clothes to Lily, huddled in the oversized jacket. "Thank you, child. You didn't have to do that. Everyone needs a little help sometimes," Alara said with a small, tired smile. She expected nothing. It was a simple act of human decency, the kind she wished the world had more of. She turned to go back to her daughter and their lonely vigil. "Wait," his voice stopped her. He reached into his thick wool coat, his hand fumbling inside. "Please, let me give you something for your trouble." Alara shook her head immediately, a firm, final gesture. "No, sir, that's not why I did it. You have a good evening. Stay warm." And with that, she took Lily's hand and walked back across the street, retrieving their suitcase and settling back into the shadows of the bus stop, never once looking back. She didn't see the old man watching her, his gaze intense and unreadable. She didn't see him pull out a sleek, modern cell phone and make a call, his voice low but clear over the sound of the rain. She was just a mother, trying to keep her daughter warm, unaware that the simple kindness she had just shown was a seed planted in the richest soil in the entire county. Silas Blackwood did not consider himself a sentimental man. He was a man of the earth, of predictable seasons and the unforgiving logic of harvest and drought. His hands, though now wrinkled with age, still held the memory of tilling soil, of mending fences, of building an agricultural empire from a single inherited plot of land. He had faced down bank foreclosures, crop failures, and the slow, grinding prejudice of a world that didn't expect a black farmer to become the wealthiest man in the valley. But the one storm he had never recovered from was the loss of his wife, Eleanor, 30 years ago. Her absence had hollowed him out, leaving behind a quiet, gruff solitude that few dared to penetrate. Yet, as he sat in the back of a warm, dry car just minutes after his encounter in the rain, he could not shake the image of the young woman. Her face, etched with a weariness that went far beyond her years, held a light of fierce, protective love for the child beside her. Her refusal of his money was what struck him most. In his world, kindness always came with a price tag, an expectation. Hers had been pure, an instinctual act of grace in a graceless world. It reminded him, painfully and sweetly, of Eleanor. "George," he said, his voice still raspy. "Did you see her?" His driver and longtime assistant, George Miller, a man whose loyalty was as steady as the Northern Star, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "I did, Mr. Blackwood. Are you all right? I told you it was too risky to walk from the specialist's office." Silas waved a dismissive hand. The doctor's lecture about his failing eyesight and the dangers of navigating the city alone faded into insignificance. "Forget that. Find her, George. The woman with the little girl." They were at the bus stop on Elm Street. "Sir, you heard me. Find them. They have nothing." The girl gave her own jacket to her child. Can you imagine that? The question was rhetorical, filled with a sense of wonder he hadn't felt in decades. "Bring them somewhere warm. Get them a meal. And be discreet. I don't want to frighten them." George, accustomed to his employer's eccentricities but sensing a new urgency in his tone, simply nodded. "Of course, sir." Finding them wasn't difficult. Alara and Lily were still there an hour later, the rain having tapered off to a miserable drizzle. Lily had fallen asleep, her head on Alara's lap, while Alara stared blankly at the passing traffic, her mind a whirlwind of impossible calculations. Where would they go? What would they eat? The $2 felt as heavy and as useless as a stone in her pocket. A polished town car pulled up to the curb, its engine a soft purr. Alara tensed, her protective instincts flaring. A man in a simple but well-tailored suit stepped out. He was middle-aged, with a kind face and gentle eyes that immediately put her on guard. Kindness from strangers was a currency she couldn't afford. "Excuse me, miss?" George began, keeping a respectful distance. "My name is George Miller. I work for the gentleman you helped across the street earlier." Alara's eyes narrowed. "Is he all right?" "He's fine, thank you. He was very moved by your kindness. He was worried about you and your daughter. Out here in the cold, George's approach was soft, careful. He could see the fear and pride warring in her eyes. He asked me to see if you would allow us to provide you with a hot meal and a warm room for the night. No more than that. Just a chance to get out of this damp. Alara's first instinct was to say no. Pride was all she had left. But then she looked down at Lily's sleeping form, at the damp strands of hair plastered to her forehead, and her resolve wavered. It wasn't about her. It was about Lily. A warm bed, a full stomach, just for one night. It was a temptation almost too powerful to resist. "Why?" she asked, her voice tight. "People don't just do things like this." George offered a small, understanding smile. "My employer, Mr. Blackwood, is a man who believes in paying debts. He feels he owes you one. Please, let us help. For the little one's sake." The mention of Lily was the key. Alara's shoulders slumped in a barely perceptible sigh of surrender. She couldn't deny her child this. "One night," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And we don't want any money." "Understood," George said, his relief palpable. He opened the rear door of the car, and a wave of warm, dry air washed over them. "Let me get your bag." As he loaded their suitcase into the trunk, Alara gently woke Lily. The little girl blinked sleepily, her eyes growing wide as she saw the plush interior of the car. For the first time that day, a tiny smile touched Lily's lips. As they settled into the soft leather seats and the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the cold, wet street behind, Alara felt a profound sense of dislocation. She was stepping into a world she didn't understand, driven by a motive she couldn't fathom. She clutched Lily's hand tightly, a silent prayer on her lips that this unexpected kindness wasn't just the prelude to a different kind of storm. The hotel room was more luxurious than any place Alara had ever stayed in her life. The bed was a mountain of white pillows and crisp linens. The carpet was thick and soft underfoot, and the bathroom had a tub so deep you could swim in it. George had arranged for room service, and soon their small table was laden with roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed green beans, and a pitcher of cold milk. Lily ate with the ravenous, single-minded focus of a child who had been truly hungry, her cheeks flushed with warmth and contentment. Alara picked at her food, her apprehension a knot in her stomach that even the delicious meal couldn't untie. This felt wrong. It was too much, too easy. After they ate, and after Lily had a long warm bath that filled the suite with the scent of lavender soap, Alara tucked her into the enormous bed. Lily was asleep in seconds, a look of perfect peace on her face. The next morning, George returned. He brought with him a bag of simple, clean clothes for them both and another hot meal for breakfast. Alara met him at the door, her resolve hardened by a night of restless sleep. "Mr. Miller, we are incredibly grateful," she began, her tone formal. "But we can't accept any more charity. We have to be on our way." George nodded as if expecting this. "Mr. Blackwood understands. He asked me to extend a different kind of offer. Not charity, miss. I'm sorry, I don't believe I got your name. It's Alara. Alara Vance. Miss Vance. Mr. Blackwood owns a large farm outside of town. It's a big property, and his longtime housekeeper recently retired. He is looking for someone to help manage the main house. It's a full-time position. Comes with a salary and, more importantly, a place to live. There's a small cottage on the property, fully furnished." Alara stared at him, speechless. A job, a home. It was the answer to every prayer she had whispered into the cold night air. It was also too good to be true. "Why me?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "You don't know anything about me. I don't have any references." "Mr. Blackwood says he saw all the reference he needed yesterday on Elm Street," George said simply. "He saw a person of character. He believes that's more important than any resume. He told me to tell you he values integrity above all else." This was her test. Alara's mind raced. It was a lifeline, a miracle. But it was a lifeline from a stranger, a powerful, wealthy man she didn't know. Her life had taught her that such men always wanted something in return. Yet, her refusal of his money the day before had been a clear statement. This offer, a job, a chance to earn her keep, felt different. It was a chance to stand on her own 2 feet, to provide for Lily not with handouts, but with the work of her own hands. What would the job involve? She asked, her voice cautious. General housekeeping, cooking, managing supplies for the main residence. Mr. Blackwood is a simple man, he doesn't entertain much. He also mentioned his late wife was an avid gardener. Her rose garden has been neglected for years. He said he would pay extra for someone willing to tend to it. The mention of the garden struck a chord deep within Alara. Her own grandmother had loved roses. The thought of bringing something beautiful back to life felt like a reflection of what she wanted for herself and Lily. It was work she would be proud to do. She looked over at the bed, where Lily was still sleeping soundly, a small smile on her lips. This wasn't just for her. It was for her daughter. A home, a garden to play in, the stability she had so desperately craved. Taking a deep breath, she met George's patient gaze. We don't have much. Just one suitcase. A warm, genuine smile spread across George's face. That's perfectly all right, Miss Vance. We can take care of everything else. Does this mean you'll accept? Alara nodded, a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. Yes, she said, her voice clear and steady for the first time in months. For my daughter's sake, yes. I'll take the job. She wouldn't be a charity case. She would be an employee. She would earn her place. It was a distinction that meant everything. The drive out of the city was like passing into another world. The gray maze of concrete and steel slowly gave way to rolling green hills and wide-open skies. Blackwood Farms was not just a farm. It was a sprawling kingdom of fertile earth. Miles of white fences lined the road, enclosing fields of corn that stretched to the horizon and pastures where herds of black cattle grazed peacefully. At the heart of it all, nestled in a grove of ancient oak trees, was the main house. It was a large, two-story stone and timber building, beautiful and sturdy, but with an air of profound loneliness about it. A short distance from the main house, down a gravel path lined with lavender bushes, was the cottage. It was small and charming, with blue shutters and a welcoming front porch. Inside, it was spotlessly clean and simply furnished, with a cozy living area, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. A vase of fresh-cut wildflowers sat on the kitchen table. Mr. Blackwood thought you and your daughter would appreciate your own space, George explained as he set their suitcase down. The pantry and fridge are stocked. Please make yourselves at home. Your duties at the main house can begin whenever you feel settled. For Lily, it was paradise. She ran from room to room, her delighted squeals echoing in the quiet country air. She discovered a small, hand-carved wooden bird on her bedside table and clutched it like a treasure. For Alara, the feeling was more complex. The quiet, the space, the sheer generosity of it all was overwhelming. It felt like a dream she was terrified of waking from. The next morning, she presented herself at the main house. Silas Blackwood was waiting for her in the kitchen, a vast room with a large wooden table at its center. In the daylight, he looked less frail than he had on the city street, but the sadness in his eyes was just as profound. He was dressed in simple work pants and a flannel shirt, looking every bit the farmer he was. Miss Vance, he greeted her, his voice that same low rumble. Welcome to my home. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Blackwood, Alara said formally. I won't let you down. I know you won't, he replied, his gaze unwavering. The house is quiet, too quiet. My wife, Eleanor, she used to fill it with noise, baking, singing. Now it's just me. An awkward silence fell between them. Alara, unsure of what to say, simply nodded. Over the next few days, she threw herself into her work. She cleaned the house until the old wood floors gleamed and the windows sparkled, letting in sunlight that seemed to have been absent for years. She cooked simple, hearty meals, stews, roasts, fresh-baked bread, and left them for him on the stove. She learned his routines, his quiet habits. He was a man of few words, but he was observant. He noticed everything. The way she organized the pantry, the small bouquet of wildflowers she placed on the hall table, the gentle hum of her presence in the house. The real connection, however, was forged not through words, but through Lily. Unburdened by adult caution, Lily was not intimidated by Silas's gruff exterior. She saw him working near the barn one afternoon and marched right up to him, holding out a fistful of dandelions. "These are for you," she announced. "They're suns for your pocket." Silas froze, staring at the bright yellow weeds in her small hand. He hadn't been given a flower in 30 years. Slowly, hesitantly, he crouched down to her level. "Well now," he said, his voice softer than Alara had ever heard it, "I reckon a man can always use some pocket suns. Thank you, little 1-inch." He took the dandelions and carefully tucked one into his shirt pocket. From that day on, an unspoken friendship blossomed between the old man and the little girl. She would follow him on his walks, her small legs scrambling to keep up with his slow, steady pace. She would sit on the porch steps and help him shell peas, her chatter filling the comfortable silence. She drew him pictures with the crayons and paper Alara had bought her with her first week's wages. A lopsided picture of his tractor, a portrait of him with a huge smile and dandelion hair. Silas tacked every single one of them to a corkboard in his study, a growing gallery of pure, unvarnished love. Alara watched these interactions from a distance, her heart swelling with a confusing mix of gratitude and hope. She began her work on the rose garden. It was a tangled, thorny mess, choked with weeds and years of neglect. But beneath the chaos, she could see the bones of something beautiful. She spent hours each afternoon, after her work in the house was done, patiently clearing away the debris, pruning the deadwood, and tending to the soil. It was hard, physical work, but it was satisfying. With each weed she pulled, she felt like she was clearing away a piece of her own past, making space for something new to grow. One evening, as dusk settled over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Silas found her in the garden, her hands covered in dirt, her face smudged but serene. "You've done good work here," he said, gesturing to a newly cleared bed where a few resilient rose bushes were already showing signs of new life. "Eleanor would have liked that." "It's a beautiful garden," Alara replied, wiping her brow with the back of her arm. "It just needed a little care." He stood beside her, not speaking for a long moment, simply looking at the garden his wife had loved. "Care?" he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose I'd forgotten how in that shared silence, surrounded by the ghosts of old roses and the promise of new blooms, a fragile trust began to take root between them, as quiet and as powerful as the seeds dormant in the earth. The seasons on the farm began to turn, and with them the seasons of the heart. The cautious respect between Alara and Silas slowly warmed into a genuine, quiet affection. The main house, once a silent monument to grief, began to feel like a home again. The scent of Alara's baking often filled the air, and the sound of Lily's laughter echoed in the hallways. Silas found himself seeking out their company, spending less time alone in his study and more time in the kitchen, listening to Lily's stories about her day or talking with Alara about the progress in the garden. One Tuesday in late autumn, a storm rolled in, a fierce tempest that seemed to carry the full weight of the changing seasons. The wind howled around the corners of the stone house, and rain lashed against the window panes. The power flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging them into a sudden, deep darkness. Lily, who had been coloring at the kitchen table, let out a small cry of fear. Alara was at her side in an instant, scooping her into her arms. "It's okay, baby. It's just the storm. We're safe in here." A moment later, a steady yellow glow appeared in the doorway. Silas stood there, holding an old-fashioned oil lantern, its light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. His face, illuminated from below, looked ancient and kind. "Figured we might need this," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. He set the lantern on the center of the table, and its warm light pushed back the oppressive darkness, creating an intimate circle of gold in the vast room. "Got a fireplace in the living room. Best we go in there. It'll be warmer." He led the way into the living room, a space Alara usually just cleaned, dominated by a massive stone hearth. He knelt with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times and soon had a crackling fire going. The three of them sat on the thick rug before it, the firelight and the lantern painting their faces in hues of orange and yellow. The storm raged outside, but inside, a profound sense of peace settled over them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames. It was Silas who finally spoke, his voice low and reflective. He was staring at a framed portrait on the mantelpiece, a photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes and a love for life that even the black and white image couldn't contain. "That's her. My Eleanor," he said softly. Alara had seen the photograph every day, but she had never asked. "She's beautiful." She was. Silas agreed, a deep ache in his voice. She loved storms, said it was the earth singing. She would have been out on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, just listening. He paused, his gaze lost in the fire. "The night I lost her, it was a night just like this one, raining so hard you couldn't see the road. A drunk driver crossed the center line. She was gone before the paramedics even arrived." The confession hung in the air, raw and heavy. This was the heart of his pain, the source of the deep solitude that clung to him like a shroud. Alara's own heart ached for him. She knew what it was to be left alone, though her loss was of a different kind. "I'm so sorry, Silas," she whispered, instinctively using his first name. He shook his head, not for pity, but as if to clear a fog from his mind. "It was a long time ago, but some things, they never really leave you. The quiet in this house afterwards. It was a physical thing. I thought I'd never get used to it, and then I did. That was the worst part." Impulsively, Alara reached out and placed her hand on his arm. It was a simple gesture of comfort, of shared humanity. "You don't have to be alone in the quiet anymore." He looked at her then, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw no pity, only a deep, profound empathy that felt like a balm on an old wound. For the first time, he saw past the employee, the woman he had helped, and saw Alara, a person of immense strength and quiet grace who had endured her own storms. "Lily's father," she found herself saying, the words coming unbidden. "He left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready to be a father. I haven't seen him since. For a long time, I thought it was my fault, that I wasn't enough to make him stay." It was the first time she had ever spoken of it to anyone. Sharing their vulnerabilities in the warm, flickering light, a powerful, unspoken bond formed between them. They were two lonely souls who had been adrift in their own separate oceans of grief and hardship, and now, in this storm-tossed house, they had found a shared harbor. Lily, who had been listening quietly, crawled from Alara's lap and curled up next to Silas, resting her head on his knee as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The old farmer rested a gentle, calloused hand on her hair, and for the first time in 30 years, the house did not feel empty, felt full. After that night, the unspoken truth of their situation settled into a comfortable reality. They were, in every way that mattered, a family. The pretense of employer and employee faded away, replaced by the easy rhythm of people who shared a life. Alara no longer left Silas's dinner on the stove but served it at the kitchen table, where the three of them ate together every night. The big, lonely house was filled with the sounds of their shared existence. Lily's chatter, the sizzle of food in a pan, the low murmur of Alara and Silas's conversations in the evening. Laughter, a sound long absent from Blackwood Farms, became a frequent guest. It started with Lily, whose childish antics could coax a rumbling chuckle from Silas's chest. Then Alara found herself laughing too, a real, unburdened sound that she hadn't realized how much she missed. Silas began to smile more, the deep lines around his eyes crinkling with a warmth that transformed his stern face. He looked younger, lighter. The weight he had carried for 3 decades was slowly being lifted, one shared meal, one silly drawing, one quiet evening at a time. He took it upon himself to be Lily's grandfather in all but name. He taught her how to identify birds by their calls, how to plant a seed and watch it grow. He even lifted her onto his oldest, most reliable tractor, letting her sit in his lap and steer, as they drove slowly through the fields. For Lily, who had never known a father's love, this stern, gentle man was a rock, a source of endless wonder and unconditional affection. Silas's focus turned to Alara as well, in ways that were both subtle and deeply meaningful. He noticed her threadbare cardigan, and one day, a soft cashmere shawl in a beautiful shade of forest green appeared on a chair in her cottage. There was no note, just the gift itself. He saw her shivering one morning while working in the rose garden and appeared with a steaming mug of coffee, insisting she come inside to warm up. He began to ask for her opinion on things, not just about the house but about the farm itself. "What do you think of planting sunflowers along that fence line, Alara?" Eleanor always wanted to. He was giving her more than just a job. He was giving her a voice, a place, a sense of belonging she had never known. She, in turn, gave him back his life. She cared for him not as a duty, but with genuine affection. She made sure he took his medications, that he ate well, that he didn't spend too much time alone with his memories. She brought the rose garden back to a state of breathtaking beauty, and on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, she cut the most beautiful white rose and placed it in a vase next to her photograph, a silent act of understanding that moved Silas to tears. This period was their honeymoon, a golden season of peace and healing. They were a small, self-contained universe of three, orbiting around each other in a pattern of mutual care and growing love. The outside world, with its harsh judgments and cold indifference, seemed a million miles away. They were safe in their sanctuary of green fields and second chances. But even the most idyllic sanctuary is not immune to intrusion. The world they had forgotten was about to come knocking, and it would arrive in a sleek, silver sports car that was as out of place on the farm as a rattlesnake in a rosebush. The car crunched up the gravel driveway one bright Saturday afternoon, its engine an obnoxious roar that shattered the country quiet. Alara was in the garden with Lily, teaching her how to tell a weed from a seedling. Silas was on the porch, reading the paper. At the sound of the engine, he looked up, and a thundercloud passed over his face. A man emerged from the car. He was in his late 30s, dressed in an expensive suit that looked ridiculous on a farm, with slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Uncle Silas," he called out, his voice oozing a synthetic charm. "Long time no see. Thought I'd pop by and see how the old man was holding up." Silas folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness. "Marcus, to what do I owe the displeasure?" The man, Marcus, was Silas's only living relative, the son of his late sister. He was a creature of the city, a real estate developer with a reputation for being ruthless and an appetite for money that was never satisfied. His visits to the farm were rare and always coincided with a need for a loan. Marcus's eyes scanned the scene, taking in the thriving garden, the signs of life around the house, and finally settling on Alara and Lily. His smile tightened. Well, it seems you've acquired some company," he said, his gaze lingering on Alara in a way that made her skin crawl. He walked over to her, his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. "And who might you be?" "This is Alara Vance," Silas said from the porch, his voice hard as granite. "She works for me. And this is her daughter, Lily." "The housekeeper," Marcus said, the word dripping with condescension. He gave Alara a dismissive once-over. "Charming. A Marcus, the nephew." The heir, you might say, he winked, as if they were sharing a dirty secret. Alara felt a chill despite the warm sun. She pulled Lily closer to her side. "It's nice to meet you," she said, her voice polite but cool. Marcus ignored her and turned his attention back to his uncle. "So this is your new setup. A pretty young housekeeper and her kid. Cozy. You've got to be careful, uncle. People can be very persuasive when they smell money." "Alara is not people, Marcus," Silas retorted, his eyes flashing with anger. "She is a woman of integrity. A concept you wouldn't understand." The visit was short and tense. Marcus made a half-hearted attempt to ask for money for a can't-miss investment, which Silas flatly refused. Throughout the conversation, Marcus's eyes kept darting towards Alara, his expression a mixture of suspicion and contempt. He saw her not as a person, but as a threat, a new and unexpected variable in the equation of his inheritance. When he finally left, his sports car spitting gravel as it sped away, a heavy silence descended. The peace of their sanctuary had been broken. Alara felt a familiar sense of dread creeping back in, the fear that anything good in her life was destined to be destroyed. "I'm sorry about him," Silas said, his voice tight with anger. "He has a sickness of the soul." "It's okay," Alara said, though it wasn't. She had seen the look in Marcus's eyes. It was the look of a predator who had just identified its prey. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he would not just go away. He would be back, and he would try to tear their newfound world apart. The golden season was over. Winter was coming. Marcus did not return in person. His attack was far more insidious. A week after his visit, Alara went into the small town of Meadow Creek for groceries. As she walked through the aisles of the familiar market, she felt a change in the atmosphere. People who usually greeted her with a friendly nod now looked away, their faces closed and judgmental. Two women whispered loudly as she passed the dairy section, their words sharp enough to cut. "That's her. The one who's shacked up with Old Man Blackwood. A real gold digger, I hear." Alara's face burned with shame. Her hands trembled as she paid for her items, avoiding the cashier's pitying gaze. When she got back to the truck, she saw it. On the front page of the local paper, folded on the passenger seat where George must have left it, was a sensationalized article. The headline screamed, "Grieving millionaire farmer preyed upon by homeless single mother? Nephew raises concerns." The story was a masterpiece of malicious insinuation. It painted Alara as a cunning, manipulative schemer who had targeted a vulnerable, wealthy old man. It twisted the facts of their meeting, implying she had orchestrated the entire event. It mentioned her past eviction and her poverty not with sympathy, but as evidence of her desperation and dubious character. Anonymous sources, clearly Marcus, were quoted expressing deep concern for Silas's well-being and the security of his estate. The article was a poison dart, and it hit its mark. Alara felt as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. Every quiet kindness, every moment of genuine connection, was twisted into something ugly and transactional. They had taken her story, her struggle, and weaponized it against her. They had turned her into a villain. She drove back to the farm in a daze, tears blurring the road ahead. Her first thought was of Silas. She had brought this shame, this ugliness, to his doorstep. Her past, which she had worked so hard to overcome, had been dragged into the light to hurt him. The quiet life they had built was now a public spectacle, a subject of sordid gossip. Her second thought was of Lily. She couldn't let her daughter grow up in a town that looked at her mother with contempt, that whispered about her behind her back. She had fought so hard to give Lily a safe and stable home, and now, through no fault of her own, she had tainted it. The decision formed in her mind with a terrible, heartbreaking clarity. She had to leave. It was the only way to protect Silas from the scandal and the only way to shield Lily from the poison of gossip. She had run from hardship her whole life, but this time, she felt she was running to protect the people she had come to love. That evening, after she put a blissfully unaware Lily to bed in the cottage, she began to pack their single, battered suitcase. Each item she folded Lily's favorite worn teddy bear, the small book of fairy tales Silas had bought her, the simple clothes that now felt like a costume, was a testament to the life she was about to lose. Her tears fell silently onto the clothing, small, dark spots of grief. She wrote a short, simple note for Silas, her hand shaking so badly the words were barely legible. "Dear Silas, I am so sorry for the trouble I have brought to you. You gave me and my daughter a home, and I have repaid you with scandal. I can't let them do this to you. We have to go. Please don't try to find us. Thank you for everything. You gave me back my hope. Yours, Alara." She placed the note on the kitchen table in the main house, where he would find it in the morning. Then, clutching their suitcase, she went back to the cottage to get Lily. She would wake her, and they would slip away into the night, disappearing back into the anonymous world from which they came. The dream was over. The cold, hard reality she knew so well was waiting for her just beyond the farm's white fences. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to do, an act of self-sacrifice born from a love she hadn't even realized had grown so deep. As she reached for the cottage door, a light flicked on inside the main house. A silhouette appeared in the window, tall and familiar. Her heart stopped. Silas was awake. He had seen her. There would be no quiet escape into the night. The crisis had arrived, and it was waiting for her on the front porch. Silas stood on the porch of the main house, the newspaper crumpled in his fist, his face a thunderous mask of rage. He had seen the light in Alara's cottage go on and off, had seen her shadow moving with a desperate haste. He knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, what she was about to do. He had read the vile article, his blood boiling with every twisted word. He wasn't a fool. He knew this was Marcus's handiwork, a pathetic, cowardly attack. But his anger at his nephew was eclipsed by a fierce, protective terror at the thought of losing Alara and Lily. He met her as she stepped out of the cottage, suitcase in hand. The porch light cast a pale, unforgiving glow on her tear-streaked face. "Don't," he said, his voice a low command that held a universe of pleading. "Don't you dare run away from this, Alara." "I have to," she choked out, clutching the suitcase handle like a shield. "Look what I've done. They're calling you a fool, and they're calling me a monster. I can't put you through this. I won't let them ruin your name because of me." "My name?" he scoffed, taking a step towards her. "My name was just a word on a deed before you came. This house was just a collection of stone and wood. You and that little girl, you made it a home again. You think I care what a bunch of gossiping fools in town think? You think I care about Marcus's pathetic lies?" He was closer now, his presence immense, his anger a palpable force. But it wasn't directed at her. It was a rage against the world that would dare to harm her. "The only thing I care about is you walking out that gate. You are not leaving. This is your home." As if on cue, the headlights of a car sliced through the darkness, and Marcus's silver sports car came roaring up the driveway, skidding to a halt. He got out, a smug, triumphant look on his face. "Well, isn't this domestic?" he sneered, seeing Alara with her suitcase. "Leaving so soon? I was just coming to offer you a ride to the bus station. It's the least I can do, for my uncle's sake." Silas turned to face his nephew, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, undiluted fury. "You," he growled, the word heavy with contempt. "You did this. You would tear down your own family for a chance at a few more dollars." "I was protecting you, Uncle," Marcus said, his voice a whine of false concern. "She's a grifter. She was playing you and I put a stop to it. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" Silas's voice rose to a roar that echoed across the quiet farm. George, drawn by the commotion, appeared in the doorway of the main house, a silent, worried witness. "You have never done a single thing in your life that wasn't for yourself. Every visit, every phone call was a prelude to you asking for money. You talk about my legacy? My legacy is in this land. It's in the sweat and the toil that I poured into it, that my father poured into it before me. It's about building something that lasts, something with integrity." He took a step towards Marcus, who flinched back involuntarily. "This woman," Silas said, pointing a trembling finger at Alara, "has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire hollow body. She came here with nothing and asked for nothing but a chance to work. She brought my wife's garden back to life. She brought this house back to life. She brought me back to life." He turned back to Alara, his eyes softening, the anger replaced by a desperate, raw vulnerability. He reached out and took her free hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "They say you're a gold digger," he said, his voice now thick with emotion. "The only gold you ever dug for was in the soil of my wife's garden. The only thing you ever took from this house was the loneliness. You didn't take from me, Alara. You gave me everything. You and Lily gave me a reason to watch the sunrise again. Tears were streaming down Alara's face now, tears of shock, of relief, of a love so powerful it stole her breath. Silas turned his gaze back to his nephew, his decision absolute. As of this moment, Marcus, you are no longer my heir. You are no longer my family. I am calling my lawyer in the morning. You will not see 1 single cent of my money, not 1 single acre of this land. Now get off my property before I have you thrown off. Marcus stared, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. You choose this trash over your own blood. She is more my family than you have ever been, Silas declared, his voice ringing with finality. He pulled Alara closer to his side. Now go. Defeated and exposed, Marcus spat on the ground, shot one last look of pure hatred at Alara, and scrambled back into his car. He tore out of the driveway, his tires squealing in protest, and disappeared into the night. The sudden silence was deafening. Silas stood, his chest heaving, still holding Alara's hand. He gently took the suitcase from her other hand and set it on the ground, a definitive thud that signaled the end of her departure. He looked into her eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. Don't ever think you are a burden, Alara Vance. You are a blessing, the greatest blessing of my life. And then, in the soft glow of the porch light, surrounded by the home they had built together, he leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was not of passion, but of deep, profound gratitude, of promises made, and of a future secured. 1 year later, the sun shone down on Blackwood Farms, bathing the land in a warm, golden light. The air was filled with the sweet, heavy perfume of roses and the gentle hum of happy conversation. In the heart of Eleanor's restored garden, beneath a simple archway woven with white roses and ivy, Silas Blackwood and Alara Vance were getting married. Alara was radiant in a simple, elegant cream-colored dress, her face glowing with a serene happiness that seemed to emanate from her very soul. Silas, standing beside her in a handsome dark suit, looked 10 years younger. The deep lines of grief that had once seemed permanently etched on his face had been smoothed away, replaced by the soft crinkles of frequent smiles. Their guests were a small, intimate gathering, the loyal George Miller, who stood as Silas's best man, a few trusted farmhands and their families, and some of the townsfolk who, having seen the truth of Alara's character over the past year, had become their staunchest friends and supporters. The malicious gossip had died away, replaced by a quiet respect for the woman who had so clearly healed their town's most respected and most reclusive citizen. But the true guest of honor was Lily. Dressed in a yellow dress that made her look like one of the dandelions she had first offered Silas, she served as the flower girl. She walked down the makeshift aisle with a grave seriousness, scattering rose petals from a small basket, her face breaking into a huge, gap-toothed grin when she reached Silas and Alara. When the time came for the vows, Silas turned to Alara, his voice thick with an emotion that captivated everyone present. Alara, I spent 30 years living in the past, in a house full of ghosts. I thought that was all that was left for me. Then you and Lily walked across the street in the rain and led me back into the light. You taught me that a home isn't made of stone, but of love. And a future isn't something you lose, it's something you build, day by day. I love you. I promise to spend the rest of my days showing you just how much. Alara's own vows were whispered, but every word was clear and true. Silas, you saw me when I was invisible. You gave me a home when all I had was a suitcase. You gave my daughter a family. You didn't just give me a second chance. You gave me my first real chance at a life filled with love and security. I love you with all my heart. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Silas didn't just kiss his bride. He bent down and swept Lily up into a big hug first, before kissing Alara to the cheers of their friends. The three of them stood together under the archway, a perfect, unbreakable triangle of love. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, the new family, Silas, Alara, and Lily Blackwood, took a walk. Lily ran ahead, chasing fireflies, her laughter like tiny bells in the twilight. Silas and Alara walked hand in hand, their steps slow and measured, their comfortable silence speaking volumes. They stopped at the crest of a hill that overlooked the entire farm, their kingdom of green and gold. "Are you happy?" Silas asked softly, his thumb caressing the back of her hand. Alara leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of the earth and the man she loved. "Happy doesn't feel like a big enough word," she said. "This is more than happiness. It's peace." They stood there for a long time, watching their daughter play, watching the last light of day fade from the sky. The journey had been arduous, a path paved with hardship and loss, but it had led them here to this perfect moment. It had all started with a simple act of kindness on a cold, rainy street, a choice to help a stranger without any thought of reward. It was proof that the smallest gesture of compassion can ripple outwards, transforming not just one life, but many, and building a future more beautiful than any of them could have ever dared to imagine. True wealth is not measured by the acreage you own or the money in your bank account, but by the love you are willing to give away. If you were touched by this story of kindness and second chances, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that will stir your soul.